I have Shawn McBride with me here today, who is somebody that will tell you what you may not know about Florida. Many of us think about Florida as this bastion of health freedom. You don't have to can be concerned about anything related to COVID or potential upcoming pandemics that government officials may use to take away health freedom. Obviously, I focus a lot on freedom of well, everything, constitutional rights. And so people are moving to Florida in droves. I've heard anywhere upwards of 1,000 people per day, and many of them seeking the freedom, Shawn, that you say they may be a little bit naive to believe is there. Let's talk about the first statute we're going to discuss today is 768.381 because
Yes.
it was just extended until when exactly?
Uh,
Later this year.
Middle of this year, right? And now
Okay.
we're now the discussions are, will this be extended again? I mean, I think the governor's statement was something to the effect of, "I hope we don't extend it," or "I'm going to try not to extend it," or something like that. He made some kind of wishy-washy comment a couple months ago about whether it's going to get extended again. But I mean, that tells you kind of they're trying to figure out what to do with the lobbyists, I think, on how to handle this thing. So.
Yeah, and I just give people a heads up. I think I'll give you obviously time to opine about what you think regarding Governor DeSantis and what's going on with his administration, whether you take his word at face value that he really is pro freedom, or you think it's smoke and mirrors. I don't have an opinion necessarily. I'm just curious what you think about it, because he does present himself as somebody who's at all costs going to protect people's medical freedom, but then you hear about extending this. He just signed this into law, and it's kind of quietly flown under the radar in a lot of ways when it comes to the stuff that he's very vocal about what he wants to be vocal about. So the question is like, okay, well, why? What about this? So let's start with, what is this? It's been discussed as like the hospital indemnity or
Yeah.
liability law, and it
Right.
relates to COVID. Let's just start at the beginning. Explain it for us.
Yeah, I mean it's a pretty simple law. You can you had it up on the screen a second ago, but basically it provides if a hospital follows a government issued treatment protocol, then their liability it's very hard to bring a malpractice claim against them, right? So with respect to COVID-19, if you follow this government issued treatment protocol, then it's hard to bring a malpractice lawsuit against a doctor or a hospital. So the net effect is, what's the hospital or doctor going to do, right? Well, you follow government issued treatment protocols. And if you dig into the definitions, the government issued treatment protocols basically are any, federal or state guidance, right? So there's no reason why you would stop using, say, the CDC protocol. And I think a lot of people that were opposed to this are saying, hey, let's let the doctors make decisions. Let the patients work together on how to make decisions. We don't necessarily just want to be all lockstep and do the same thing over and over again. But this law basically incentivizes everybody just to keep doing what they're doing, right? Why would you go off of the CDC protocol if you're not going to have liability for it? And the CDC's behind it, which, hospital people tell us, just makes your life easier, right? If you cooperate with the CDC, they're just going to be nicer to you. That's the kind of what we've heard, right? If you're not making waves, maybe your next audit or whatever is going to go better, right?
So Rook Fork here on YouTube says SB 2006 tells us all about the vaccine mandate snuck in. And we are going to discuss that in a minute. We're just going to stick right now with this particular SB 17. Remind me again, what is it?
7014 was the
7014. Okay,
yes.
Sorry. My exhausted 6-month-old mom dyslexia is kicking in.
Yeah,
okay,
and the bill numbers, it gets confusing in Florida because they recycle them every session, right? So I know other states do the same thing, but
the only thing Florida recycles. No, I'm just kidding. I just had to get that joke in.
Yeah, there you go. But so they reuse the number every session. So this is 7014 that was in the 2022 session.
Gotcha.
Which is what basically all 70114 did was take this existing law, which you have on the screen, and extend the expiration date.
Okay. So I wanted to just show people, you don't have to believe me, just look at the screen here. And I think this is it, right? So once you go past,
All the
they
definitions. A lot
define
of
it, right?
right. Yeah.
Government issued health standards means federal, state, or local laws, rules, regulations, or orders that describe the manner in which a healthcare provider must operate. And then they define healthcare provider. Let's go back down here to the preliminary procedures, right?
Yeah.
Because
Four is really where the rubber starts hitting the road as
right
far as
here,
the protections,
yeah,
right?
the
It says
defenses, affirmative defenses, right?
right. So
Because
it
you
says
see here, substantial compliance with government issued health standards. And then B,
yeah.
substantial compliance with government issued health standards. C, substantial compliance with government issued health standards. So
Right.
yeah, it just says it in every single one of
Right.
them.
So you comply with
Government
government
issued health
standards.
standards.
And the way the definition is, it's basically a grab bag, right? You just pick which government standards you want. One thing that did happen when they signed this extension, because I think there was a lot of articles out there asking for SB 7014 to be killed. You know, Governor DeSantis and the state health officer gave a press conference and said, "Well, we're issuing all these Florida government standards for treatment of COVID-19." And the problem is there was just no reason for a hospital to leave that old CDC standard, right? You get to pick federal or state. Why would you suddenly change all your operations and switch to the state standard unless there was some incentive to do so? So, yeah, you can get the liability protection whether you follow the CDC federal guidance or whether you follow the Florida state guidance. But the problem we've got from a real market standpoint is why would you innovate? Why would you separate? And why would you change? And so that's where we're at.
All right. Before we move on to the one about the vaccine mandate and everything that a lot of
Yeah.
people are probably totally unaware of,
Yeah.
why should people care about hospitals having liability coverage, I guess, or getting to be free from getting sued if they follow government issued standards? I mean, I guess why would the average person care about that? What does that mean for healthcare?
Well, the question is, and the horror stories we hear are, people that get put into a hospital, and then the hospital is going to have their regulations, and then you have the government issued standards. So basically, a lot of these families, and you can find the interviews out there. I've met a lot of these people along the way. They feel like once their loved one was in the hospital, they were no longer in control, right? The hospital has their way of doing it. They're following the government issued standards. They're getting liability protection for following the government issued standards. So a lot of these families feel like they just were no longer active in the decision making, right? So, and then, if you want to try something different, if you want to disagree with the doctors on the treatment plan for your loved one, it can be very difficult for them to get the hospital to change the standard, right? So these people are going down whatever treatment standard or protocol they put the people on, and it really takes away kind of that doctor-patient decision-making, doctor-family decision-making. It's just basically the stories we hear are these people got locked into a certain way of being treated, and that's just what kept happening. And
okay, Shawn. Let's see. So the folks who I guess are then moving to Florida or even in Florida right now and are saying, yeah, but you're just being too hard on DeSantis specifically because this is the legislature of Florida. Like, what's the guy supposed to do? It's not like he hasn't taken any authoritarian stance towards executive orders that restrict health freedom. He's just signing into law what the people's elected officials have put into place. Why are we being so negative about him and his leadership? Because I've seen other podcasts where people are like, he's a hack for the globalists. He's all smoke and mirrors. He's not really, and then other people are like, well, that's just way too hard because he's just signing into law what the legislature has voted in. You're blaming him for something that's not his fault. What do you say about that?
Well, I think the frustration we hear the most is just the disconnect between the talking points and what we're seeing in the newspapers and the headlines and the speeches he gives, and then what's actually happening behind the scenes, right? So, SB 2006, it looks like we're going to talk about that in a minute. That's kind of a prime example, right? So the headlines are no vaccine mandates in Florida, but if you read it, it's Swiss cheese. It's got a whole bunch of different holes in it. So, I don't know how you pass the bill with all the holes in it, including you potentially need to be vaccinated to get health care in Florida, right? A hospital or doctor's office is free to require vaccination documentation So you have these kind of holes, and then you have, headlines saying, no vaccine mandates in Florida. So there's just a large disconnect between where these laws are and where they're going, and I think you and I talked before the show about the forced vaccination law here in Florida. State of Florida retains the authority to at least force treatments according to written law. If you dig out an old judge's guide, the state of Florida may still have the ability to force people to take a vaccine against their will. That's just the state, not the employer, right? So starts becoming this distinction, right? Like the SB 2006 spoke largely to employers requiring vaccinations for workplace, government requiring vaccinations to use governmental services, education facilities, right? So it picked up certain things, but nobody ever addressed the fact that there could be this day where the government just comes in and says, hey, you have to take the vaccine or you have to take this treatment, right? So that disconnect between the details is where I think a lot of people have gotten frustrated.
Okay, in a second, we're going to talk about that forced vaccine mandate. But first, don't forget, we've had a couple bank runs, and the Fed just raised inflation rates. Inflation rates. The Fed just raised rates, and then inflation's probably going to go up. But they did basically just probably raise inflation. I don't know. They say they're fighting it. I'm not really sure what's going on. We should do a whole nother episode on the Fed at this point. I had Peter Schiff on not too long ago, and it's interesting, but I will admit, it does seem a little daunting to be somebody who's thinking that they're going to make it to retirement. That's another thing. I just had a guy on talking about EMPs. Maybe we're all going to die before you even have to worry about your 401k or your IRA. I don't know. But if you do think you're going to make it to retirement and you do have an IRA and you want to back it up with precious metals, considering going over to morrowgold.com and checking out Noble Gold. They've been in business over 20 years. They've got nearly 5 stars with the Better Business Bureau and Consumer Affairs. And it's a great way to support my work if you've been considering looking into this anyway. Give them a call. Like I said, 4.98 out of 5 stars with Better Business Bureau and 4.9 out of 5 stars with Consumer Affairs. 877-646-5347, 877-646-5347, or visit morrowgold.com. They can tell you what it costs to sign up, what it costs to maintain, what it costs to withdraw. And also, if you get in by the end of the month, you will get a 1/4 ounce American Gold Eagle coin if you have a qualified IRA of $50,000 or more. I have to say thank you to everybody who already has just gone and just checked them out, just asked some questions to see if it's right for you, because they decided to sponsor a few more videos. So thanks to Noble Gold for that. And thanks to everybody who has been watching and supporting my sponsors, because it really does help bring people like Shawn on. My disclaimer that the government says I have to read, talking about government and freedom, Shawn. This is not financial advice. There's always a risk when investing, and there are no guarantees of any kind. So thanks again, everybody. morrowgold.com, 877-646-5347. And then let me know. Let me know what you think after talking to them, and let's get back to the video. Okay, so let's talk about this vaccine thing. I'm going to pull up on my screen. So this was SB 2006, right?
Yes, from 2021, I believe that was the
Okay, yeah, I see it. Okay, let's take a look at that. Here we go. Let me pull up while you're talking, I'm going to try to pull up the text. Go for it.
Sure. So this was heralded as, the ban of vaccine mandates in the state of Florida, and it did add a new code section. If you scroll down, one of the big operative provisions here is around line 1121, where it talks about COVID-19 vaccination documentation. And so this was said, to be the end of vaccine mandates in the state of Florida. But then, the details started getting a little bit uglier after that. You may have a different version than I am, but that's, I can scroll up a little bit. Let's see. Oh, here you go.
1121 right here. Yep.
Yeah. It basically says, business can't require COVID-19 vaccination documentation. And so this was supposed to be the end of like COVID passports or whatever. But if you scroll down to I think it's subsection 5, it's been a little while since I looked at this. Scroll down another, see where, keep going. There's like a carve out for healthcare providers. Yeah, section 5. This section does not apply to a healthcare provider, a service provider licensed in, these healthcare laws. So basically, if you're a doctor, you can require COVID-19 vaccination documentation. And then, this thing got a very mixed record in the courts. Didn't really, I mean, one judge opinion was that, yeah, you can't require somebody to actually physically deliver a document, but you could put a sign on your door saying unvaccinated, not allowed to come in here, right? Because this only talks about reviewing documentation. It doesn't actually say you can't prohibit unvaccinated people from coming in your business. It just says you can't look at their documents. So, it's one of these ones where the title's really good, but in the actual application, it didn't do much. And, a lot of people complained about different businesses and these $5,000 fines. I mean, I guess we don't have the details on it, but I've never actually heard of somebody being fined for violating this.
Can you talk a little bit about the history dating back to 9/11 and medical treatments, forced medical treatment in Florida?
Yeah, that's where our the big one. It's Florida Statute 381-00315. That's where it really emanated from. So what happened was way back in, a post September 11th period, I guess there was already these draft laws out there on public health emergencies, which have been authored by law professors. And I understand now from additional research, the CDC may have had a hand in drafting these laws, but these laws were out there being proposed for what do you do in a public health emergency. And then what happened was the September 11th attacks happened. The people that were shopping these laws started going to different states and saying, hey, we've got these laws, that are not, draft laws, model laws that aren't actually been enacted yet, but you guys should be enacting something to do if there's a public health emergency. And so Florida, that's where this kind of forced treatment / potentially forced vaccination authority came from, is they went out and enacted this law, really in a knee-jerk reaction because, September 11th happened. What if there was a bio attack? What if something else came out? Most of the states rejected this model law in the early form because it was very, very extreme for state power. Other states adopted a much milder version of this law if they adopted it at all. And so Florida has kind of the most extreme version of a public health law compared to our sister states, as the lawyers would say.
There's a question over on Locals live chat. Again, everyone, if you haven't gone over to AllisonMorrow.locals.com and signed up to be part of my editorial board, consider doing it. $5 a month to go one-on-one with the most censored people on the internet. And you get to put your questions ahead of time for interview. Plus, I take the live chat questions during the podcast. So Wells Mortensen asks, this might have been mentioned, but who exactly issues the Florida government health guidelines? $100, it's unvoted in Council of Concerned Stockholders in Ivory Lab Coats.
Yeah, well, it's coming from the State Department of Health, right? So as is typically kind of the case, you have statutory law, which the legislature does, and then they generally delegate rulemaking to the whatever department, whatever administrative agencies in charge. So that's what we have, right? So these government issued standards that came from the state of Florida came from the Florida Department of Health, and so. What's going on over there as far as how the details are working and how things are coming in and out of there. I mean, that's an open question, right? But Dr. Ladapo he's been a voice of freedom. Let's give him credit for that. He has gone out and spoke about, statistical studies of treatments and how things are working and not working. He's made a lot of headlines. So he's heading that up, but it's his people that are doing that. But meanwhile, it's his same people there that are making these regulations that also, supposedly don't want to give up the forced treatment authority from what we've understood from conversations, So, it's coming out of a governmental agency of, people that are working full time for the government and whatever influences and things are going into that, right? You can talk about how that soup's made in different forums, but yeah.
Okay, I want to ask you about what the big deal is with that too. So we talked about big picture. Why should people care about the hospital liability, government, issued standards or whatever? And I want to know why people should care about this. Hey, it was on the books back 9/11. Everything seems to be fine. No one's been forced into vaccine camps or anything yet, or treatment camps yet in Florida. Why should people care? But hang on. If you're listening to Shawn and you're like, man, I really need a drink. It's Friday. This is just too heavy for me. And I don't know if I trust anybody anymore. Well, you don't have to trust me, but you can go trust yourself and your own taste buds at AllisonWinePromo.com and decide if these pair well with the best videos, which I have to say, I think are my videos on the internet. So I'm going to just go out there and say they're Well, this one's a 92-point Malbec, so I'm going to put my podcast at 93 points, just above my wine. Go get some amazing Malbecs from Argentina, high altitude, remote locations, family operations. The one in the middle comes from the oldest vineyard in Argentina at over 200 years old, the one on the left. They hand harvest the grapes. Extremely limited production. You can't get these at the grocery stores. Why would you want to? If you're already a wine drinker, go get 50% off the wine and 50% off shipping. Support my sponsors. Along with Noble Gold this month too, the wine and gold, I got to say, they're keeping me in business. They keep people like Shawn on. So it does really help if you go check out the sponsors and let me know what you think. Like I said, just like with Noble Gold, let me know what you think about the wine. I hear great reviews about it all the time. I drink it myself. So AllisonWinePromo.com and thanks again for those people who've already toasted in honor of free speech. Okay, so let's go back to that big question. Why did people care about something that seemingly, is on the books, but really hasn't had necessarily any, real world effect on people's lives at this point?
No, and I understand that argument. I think the biggest complaint, if you dig into Florida's law on the forced treatments, 381.00315, and then potentially the forced vaccinations under 381.003, which a judge's guide, the 381.003 language is kind of vague, but a judge's guide says that there's authority there to mandate vaccines. The issue is the power really rests in one person, right? We talked about the State Department of Health led by the state surgeon general, and 381.00315 is crystal clear that this person is really the decision maker. And for at least a period of 60 days, they can be ordering treatments even without the governor's consent. So I think that's the biggest issue, right? Is we've moved through this period. I think a lot of people are questioning kind of who has authority, who can declare emergencies, what power should they have on emergencies. And here in Florida, really, we got one person who's going to make medical decisions potentially for 21 million people. Mm-hmm. And the people that are concerned, right? Why should one person be able to make medical decisions for 21 million people? But that's currently what the written law says here in Florida.
Yeah, it's just interesting because, in places like New York, the lawyers are fighting because they are enacting laws like this now. It's not just like something that was put on the book. And I can understand I understand the concern on both sides, but I just hear that from people, hey, it's not like DeSantis is doing this right now. Like the governor of New York is actually enacting this stuff.
Well, and that's, and if you talk to the people that are really advocates for repealing this law, the vast majority of them are not concerned about potentially, Governor DeSantis or Dr. Latipo using them, right? And nobody really gets the sense that these two are itching to run out and force treatments or force vaccinations under 381.003 if that authority is there. What they're concerned about is who's next in line, right? What happens? And in Virginia, very similar law in Virginia. Virginia is one of the states that enacted a similar law. Their state health officer actually came out right when the vaccines were being developed and being ready to release. And he said, I'm going to use my authority to mandate everybody take a vaccine. And then there was a public outrage. The governor calmed them. Then they changed governors in Virginia. But the Virginia state health officer actually said, yeah, let's use this. So, we got at least one case where a state health officer thought this was a good idea.
Right. It's just a reminder, I think, to people that be very careful the power you give the person you like, because unless you're living under a monarchy, which, we may be in soon. I don't know.
Yes. People talk about that.
However, it's likely, I guess even in a monarchy, like they'll eventually die and somebody else is going to take over and you may not like that person very much. So if you've given a lot of authority to the person you do like, you're setting up the person you don't like at some point to have the same authority. So just, be aware that kind of thing happens. Okay, we're going to go take some questions over at AllisonMorrow.locals.com. Again, go join my editorial board if you haven't yet. Support the producers. I hate saying college fund because I'm not sure college is worth anything anymore, but let's just say trade school fund, okay? What do you want to be, Jack? Oh, you want to be he wants to be a producer. He wants to keep being a producer. So he'll just work for free forever for his mom. That's what every boy wants to do, right? Every son wants to work with his mom for free. Thanks, everybody who's watching on YouTube. I think we're going to cut the stream now on YouTube. We'll be live on ROKFIN and Rumble just because, we just like it better over there. I always say, Shawn, because I got some questions in here that I want you to be able to answer. We're not leaving YouTube because of censorship or anything.